Meet Christine. She loves shopping. And this is the sound of fashion overload. Too many fabulous things, not enough space. So Christine started selling with The RealReal.
I've always loved collecting designer pieces. Gucci bags, Prada heels. But my style keeps evolving. Selling with The RealReal? Game changer. I earn more, and they do everything.
Seriously, just drop off your items or schedule a pickup. We handle the photos, descriptions, pricing, even shipping. You just sit back and watch your items sell fast to our 38 million members.
And I get peace of mind knowing I earn more selling with The RealReal than anywhere else.
Exactly. That's the sound of your closet working for you. The RealReal. Earn more, save time, sell fast. And right now, you can get an extra $100 site credit when you sell for the first time. Go to therealreal.com to get your extra $100. Therealreal.com. That's therealreal.com.
How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
Hello, America. It is Eric Erickson here across the United States. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, I would be very happy to have you. But first, before I take any phone calls, I got a lot of audio to navigate you through on the decision today, or the oral argument today from the United States Supreme Court. The President of the United States was in attendance at the United States Supreme Court today to hear arguments on the case about the President's executive order on birthright citizenship. It probably is not going to go well for the President, and he left halfway through the arguments. First sitting President of the United States ever attend an oral argument of the Supreme Court. The issue involves the 14th Amendment in Section 1. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That first sentence. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. What does "and subject to the jurisdiction thereof" mean? There's a case from the late 1800s called Wong Kim Ark. In Wong Kim Ark, two Chinese citizens come to the United States and become non-citizen residents of the United States. They have a child. Their child goes back to China, and when he returns to San Francisco, by then a law barring the entry of Chinese citizens has been passed, and he comes into the country and is denied entrance into the country. And he sues, goes to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court says that his parents were not citizens of the United States, but they were domiciled here. Therefore, he is a citizen of the United States. That case was subsequently glommed onto by judges around the country over the next 100 years to say that if an illegal alien comes into this country and gives birth, that that child is an American citizen. Critics say there's a distinction. The parents of Wong Kim Ark were legally admitted into the country through immigration processes and given permission by the United States to be here, unlike illegal aliens. The fallout problem here relates to a story in the news this very week. The Chinese are flying pregnant Chinese women into American territories to give birth so that the Chinese children have American citizenship. It's a, birthright tourism industry in China right now. It's not just that. It's also the illegal immigrants coming into the country and having kids. Are the kids American citizens? For the last 100 years, the United States has determined by default that, yes, they are. The president, by executive order, seeks to change that. One of the questions before the court today is, can the president do that? And also, well, if they can, is it retcon? Does it go back retroactively? Do we invalidate the citizenship of people who've been here for 100 years? Now, here's something you need to know. John Sauer, the gravelly-voiced Solicitor General, did not do well in the court today. And there are those who say he did, and they are not lawyers. The lawyers who listened, even on the president's side, were a little bit horrified out of the gate by this exchange between John Sauer and Neil Gorsuch.
Do you think Native Americans today are birthright citizens under your test and under your friend's test?
I think so. I mean, obviously, they've been granted citizenship by statute.
Put aside the statute.
Yeah.
Do you think they're birthright citizens?
No, I think the clear understanding that everybody agrees in the congressional debates is that the children of tribal Indians are not birthright citizens.
I understand that's what they said, but your test is the domicile of the parents, and that would be the test you'd have us apply today, right?
Yes. So if a tribal Indian, for example, gives up allegiance to...
Born today, birthright citizens.
I think so on our test, yeah, if they're lawfully domiciled here.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I have to think that through, but that's my reaction.
I'll take the yes. That's all right.
That's a problem because the answer is technically no. That's why the writers of the 14th Amendment put in subject to the jurisdiction thereof, because they were... American Indians were considered through treaties with the United States not to be citizens until 1924, when Native Americans, American Indians, were granted full birthright citizenship under the Indian Citizen Act, or the Snyder Act. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship to most, but it excluded American Indians who were not considered subject to the jurisdiction of the United States because of tribal leadership. But based on the position that that John Sauer is now arguing, they would have been, which contradicted the people who were writing the 14th Amendment. And that came up a lot today, the issue of the 14th Amendment and where people stood on the 14th Amendment, in large part because there was a great deal of reliance on some of the history in the United States Senate, where the author essentially was arguing that illegal aliens would not be granted citizenship. And, well, John Sauer kind of muddied the water on that today. This is an exchange between Amy Coney Barrett and John Sauer.
Okay, let's talk about its applications. So, there are some, I can imagine it being messy in some applications. So what would you do with what the common law called foundlings? The thing about this is then you have to adjudicate. If you're looking at parents, and if you're looking at parents' domicile, then you have to adjudicate both residence and intent to stay. What if you don't know who the parents are?
I think there are marginal cases. That one, I think, has the benefit of being addressed in 1401F, where it talks about...
Yeah. But what about the Constitution?
Under the Constitution, domicile is a constitutional standard in all kinds of other situations.
Well, and it's hard.
Diversity jurisdiction, personal jurisdiction, sorry.
Well, yeah, and personal jurisdiction, 1332, diversity jurisdiction. And the thing is, it has to be litigated because it turns on intent. And both the virtue of both jus soli and jus sanguinis, whichever one you pick, it's a bright line rule. How would it work? How would you adjudicate these cases? You're not going to know at the time of birth for some people whether they have the intent to stay or not, including U.S. citizens, by the way. What if you have someone who is living in Norway with their husband and family, but is still a U.S. citizen, comes home and has her child here and goes back? How do we know whether the child is a U.S. citizen because the parent didn't have an intent to stay?
I'd say make 2 points, one practical, one legal. The practical point is, under the terms of this executive order, you don't have to, because the executive order turns on objectively verifiable things, which is immigration status. Are you lawfully present but temporarily present, or do you have an illegal status? So those kind of taking evidence, so to speak, under subjective intent wouldn't be done. And as to the constitutional point, obviously domicile is baked into a lot of constitutional and legal concepts, and there may be situations where facts are determined. But if you look at the guidance that all the agencies did after this court in Costa said the agency could go forward and issue guidance, the guidance provides, I think, very, very clear, objective, verifiable approaches to doing this. And so as a practical matter, I don't think it's presented by this executive order.
The point there that Amy Coney Barrett is getting to is there is an intent on, if you are subject to the jurisdiction thereof, does someone come into the country and decide they want to be subject to the intent or not? Neil Gorsuch himself sounded pretty skeptical throughout the hearing today.
I'm just working within your argument for a moment. Today, you can point to laws against immigration that are much more restrictive than they were in 1860. We really didn't have laws like that we do today until maybe 1880. So if somebody showed up here in 1868 and established domicile, that was perfectly fine without respect to any immigration laws. There they were. And so why wouldn't we, even if we were to apply your own test, come to the conclusion that the fact that someone might be illegal is immaterial?
I would first cite Wong Kim Ark on that point, because Wong Kim Ark says you're...
Well, I'm not sure how much you want to rely on Wong Kim Ark.
But there is a statement in there that says, so long as they are permitted to be here. So Wong Kim Ark, keep in mind that by the time they decide Wong Kim Ark in 1898...
but that's 1898. Now I'm looking at 1868, you're telling me is when I should look, and the test for domicile. And the stuff you have about unlawfully present, it's like Roman law sources you're going to.
First and second restatements as well.
See, this is the problem for the people who have argued that Wong Kim Ark either was decided wrong or it was right, but it didn't apply to illegal aliens, is you do have not just that 100-year history here, you have the prior history too. Let me give you some of the prior history of how citizenship worked in the United States prior to the 14th Amendment. And just so you understand, the argument made by the Trump administration Solicitor General today in part argued that the 14th Amendment ratified prior understanding. But that then complicates matters because of Martin Kosta. Kosta was a Hungarian rebel in the Austrian Empire in the 1840s and fled to New York and established his residence. So how did he establish his residence? He showed up in the United States and went to a New York state court and filed what he called a first paper, a declaration of intent to become a citizen. There was no federal agency involved. He didn't do it with the federal government. This was before green cards were invented. But he went to federal court. He went to a state court in New York and said, I intend to become an American citizen. On a business trip in 1853 to Smyrna in Turkey, which was part of the Ottoman Empire, he was abducted by Austrians who considered him a traitor to Franz Joseph, the Austrian emperor. Under Austrian law, he was still subject to Austrian law. Captain Douglas Ingram, U.S. Navy officer on the USS St. Louis in Smyrna, considered it decisive that Kosta had declared his intent to become an American citizen in a state court and ordered the Austrians to hand over Kosta and said he would fire upon the Austrian positions if they did not release him. And so they did. And he was backed up by Franklin Pierce's Secretary of State, William Marcy. And the Navy named a ship after Ingram, who, by the way, later signed up for the Confederate Navy, and the United States still named ships after him for defending the sovereignty of the United States. And Ronald Reagan told the story of Kosta as a parable about American protection of its people abroad. And keep in mind, Kosta came to the country without permission to be here, declared he wanted to be a citizen of the United States, and the United States in the 1860s said, or 1850s said, yep, that makes him a citizen. And today, John Sauer, before the Supreme Court, said essentially the Supreme Court, the 14th Amendment ratified the prior understanding. And if it ratified the prior understanding, then it ratified the understanding that you could come into this country, declare yourself and intending to be an American citizen without having the permission of the United States to be here. That's part of the problem. Sauer didn't do a great job. Now, the excerpt, the segment that probably has done the most today and cheered on a lot of people who hate the idea of the living Constitution is this exchange between John Sauer and the Chief Justice of the United States, John Roberts.
Based on Chinese media reports, there are 500 birth tourism companies in the People's Republic of China whose business is to bring people here to give birth and return to that nation.
Having said all that, you do agree that that has no impact on the legal analysis before us?
I think it's, I'd quote what Justice Scalia said in his Hamdan dissent, where their interpretation has these implications that could not possibly have been approved by the 19th century framers of this amendment. I think that shows that they've made a mess. Their interpretation has made a mess of the provision.
Well, it certainly wasn't a problem in the 19th century.
No, but of course, we're in a new world now, as Justice Alito pointed out, where 8 billion people are one plane ride away from having a child who's a U.S. citizen.
Well, it's a new world. It's the same Constitution.
It is, and as Justice Scalia said, I think in the case that Justice Alito was referring to, you've got a constitutional provision that addresses certain evils, and it should be extended to reasonably comparable evils. He said that about statutory interpretation. I think the same principle applies here, and I think we quote that in our brief.
It's a new world, but it's the same Constitution. Amen and amen. That is constitutional conservatism in a nutshell. There's a lot more in the argument today. I will tell you, I suspect what we're going to see is the Supreme Court, pretty much all of them agreed. They didn't want to settle this on statutory grounds. They want a definitive constitutional interpretation of the 14th Amendment, and I don't think it's going to go the way of the president. It might be 7-2. You may see Alito and Thomas with the president here, but I don't think the president had the majority of the room. What I do think we will see, however, is a Supreme Court willing to say things like birth tourism are things that Congress can make exceptions to. I don't think they will preclude Congress from making exceptions without having to do a constitutional amendment. But I just, based on the oral arguments, I listened to them today, and there was a lot of skepticism in the room, including from Sam Alito, on the issue of overruling 100 years of citizenship to illegal aliens in this country. Then when Sam Alito is casting doubts on the argument, you should pay attention. Welcome back. The phone number 877-973-7425 should you wish to be on the program. I got to tell you, Ketanji Brown Jackson just continues to show herself to be an absolute moron. Just listen to this exchange.
I was thinking about this, and I think there are various sources that say this, that you obviously have permanent allegiance based on being born in whatever country you're from. That's what everybody recognizes. But you also have local allegiance when you are on the soil of this other sovereign. And I was thinking, I, a U.S. citizen, am visiting Japan. And what it means is that, if I steal someone's wallet in Japan, the Japanese authorities can arrest me and prosecute me. It's allegiance, meaning can they control you as a...
But the criminal law has always been different from the civil law. The criminal statute's different from civil statutes, and that's a terrible example, but that's what you get when you have Ketanji Brown Jackson there. Now, what you get with Incogni is data protection online and privacy protection online. INCOGNI. Incogni.com/Eric. INCOGNI.com/Eric. ERICK. Incogni.com/Eric. Get 60% off. What do? They go online and they tell the data brokers, stop selling your data, because data brokers sell your data online. They sell your prescriptions. They sell your personal information. Your social security number can be up for grabs. Your kids' information, social media links, all this stuff can be bought online. And Incogni sends the takedown notices, and they follow up relentlessly with the data brokers to make sure your stuff gets taken down. They've taken down my data off of 324 websites so far and counting, and they will do it for you as well. Get maximum protection online against your data being sold. Incogni it helps you reduce your spam calls and spam emails and your credit cards list, everything. It just protects you online. Incogni.com/Eric. ERICK. Incogni.com/Eric. Save 60%. Incogni.com/Eric. Hello and welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, if you text the word Eric, ERICK, to 33777, you can get the live stream, the show notes, the podcast, so much more. We are days from the start of the Masters, people. I am very excited. Now, let's go to the phones. Jack, you're going to be up next. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Thank you, Eric. I truly enjoy your show, and thank you for taking my call. I just want to say that what would you suggest would be the best solution for this birthright citizenship? It sure appears that the Supreme Court's going to keep it the same as it is. But what can we do to avoid the tourism stuff that's happening in China and other countries like that take advantage of the game system, basically?
What I hope the Supreme Court is going to do, and so there was a side conversation, Jack, about the exceptions to birthright citizenship, and were those exceptions historic and fixed, or could they be expanded by Congress? And the ACLU position today was that they were historic and fixed. So the exceptions were a military invasion of the country, the ambassadors of foreign nations, things like that. People who really weren't intended to be subject to the jurisdiction of the country per se. I think what the Supreme Court position probably should be and will be is that birthright citizenship does actually fall under the historic understanding from the 1800s, but that Congress may extend exceptions and put the ball in Congress's court to prohibit birth tourism and illegal immigrant prospectively in the country. I don't think Congress can retroactively undo the citizenship of a child of an illegal immigrant in the country. I don't think they would have that power, but moving forward, they could. And I think they should, by the way. I don't like the idea that someone can come into this country pregnant and without the permission of the government and come here and give birth and that child become an American citizen. And I really don't like the idea that the Chinese can fly a pregnant woman into American territory to ensure that that child becomes an American citizen. Congress should be allowed to stop that without having to amend the Constitution. Part of the side argument today was about the exceptions. Now, listen, I want to say this. There are a few people, and they've called the program very angrily in the past, who claim to be experts in the 14th Amendment. And their argument essentially boils down to one or two people who participated in the congressional debate in the 1800s, particularly in the Senate, who were the wordsmiths of the 14th Amendment, who said that they did not intend these things to be so. They didn't intend, for example, illegal aliens to be citizens. And I understand that's in the transcripts. I understand that's in the record. The Supreme Court does not care about, nor should it care about, what someone's intentions was, but what was the wording based on the prior wording. And prior to the 14th Amendment, we had statutory considerations. And the argument today in the Supreme Court was that the congressional wording essentially echoed the statutory wording. We should focus on the Constitution, not the statutory wording, but the statutory wording included people able to come into this country, declare themselves wanting to be citizens without ever taking the process, and we would treat them and their children as citizens. That's part of the problem here. It's a messier situation. My suspicion is that what we will get is a Supreme Court that says Congress can expand exceptions, but that the understanding without the exceptions is birthright citizenship as we've understood it for the last 100 years. Now, that being said, if the Supreme Court wants to give us a bonus, I think they could actually say tourism, birth tourism, is not contemplated by the 14th Amendment and go on and nip that one in the bud themselves. I think they could do that, but I think they'll be pretty cautious in how they do that. I literally just think that we have a 100-year understanding of this. And we could have gotten ahead of it until now, but we haven't. And the fact that we haven't means that we have been okay until now. And until now, we haven't had the abuse. It is the abuse that we have seen in the past few years with Chinese tourism and with illegal aliens flooding the border that has provoked this. But if you want the change, you need to do it constitutionally through an act of Congress, not just through a presidential executive order. And that's part of the problem here. And the case in play is the executive order by the president deciding that he, without an act of Congress, can do something when actually it is the Congress that has to exercise control according to even the 14th Amendment. Now, I got to move on from here. I'm happy to take your questions on this, though. 877-973-7425. I want to play for you some audio from Fox and Friends with Ed Bastian. If any of you work at Delta, you be sure to tell Ed I'm saying nice things about him on the radio today. I like Ed Bastian. He's the CEO of Delta. We don't always see eye to eye on stuff, but he's a good guy, and his company is marvelous. Now, listen, I realize it's because I live in the Atlanta, Georgia area that I fly Delta. I could fly Southwest. I choose not to. I want an airplane that actually doesn't try to pull my leg with fancy stunts. I want an airplane that takes me seriously, and Delta does. One day I hope to be able to afford NetJets, and that will move me beyond Delta to flying private on NetJets. Those of you in Dayton, Ohio, be sure to tell your CEO I'm saying nice things about NetJets. But the Delta CEO has a line set up, and let me explain to you why Delta has a congressional hotline where congressmen can get preferential treatment. Because unlike you and me, for the most part, businesses that fly a lot have the same perk as Congress. Congressmen sometimes are there on a Thursday, and they're planning on going home Thursday night, and then a vote gets held over. Rand Paul objects to something and keeps the Senate in session, or the House has to hold the vote long, and they miss their flights. So the congressional staff are able to call Delta and American Airlines and United and say, hey, the congressman was supposed to be on this flight. Congress is still in session. They're not going to be able to make it. Can you reroute them? And it's almost a direct access point of contact. They can bypass sitting on hold for an hour. They can do all of this stuff. That's separate from the TSA bypass. It's the scheduling their flights home. And I am very sympathetic to it. I do not fault them for having it. I think it is fine for them to have. Major Fortune 500 companies have the exact same perk. I think you're in Congress. You're there on a Thursday night. You want to get home. The vote's held late. Now you got to go home at 6 a.m. on Friday. Your staff being able to call the airline and get you moved quickly. I don't have a problem with that. I am perfectly fine with my congressman being able to rearrange his flight without having to pay a fee because he's up in Washington having a miserable time and can't get home because one member of Congress held the whole place hostage for a stunt. I'm fine with that. But when they're refusing to go back to work to figure out the shutdown, I got a problem with them having the perk, and Delta does too, and they got rid of the perk. This is Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta.
Well, given the lack of leadership that we've seen coming from our elected officials, the fact that we would continue to extend courtesy opportunities for them to bypass the mess that they've created, we want to make sure they understand what they're and stand in line just like everybody else. We let their offices know ahead of time, and I think they understand why we had to do what we did.
How long will the pause continue for those perks?
At a minimum, until everything is back and running normally, the workers are paid, and at that point, we'll decide whether we continue it.
I got to be honest, Mr. Speaker, I don't think they deserve the perks. No. All the airlines should follow suit. Why do we have to wait in the line for 5 hours and they get to go to the front of the line?
I agree 100%. The airlines are right. I mean, there are some occasions where members of Congress get escorted around for security reasons at heightened threat environments and all that kind of stuff. But my members don't do that. They don't skip the line. They're crazy. They represent their constituents. So if anybody's been taking advantage of a perk like that, bad luck, obviously. Congress has to do its job.
Now, here's the thing, is that the skipping the lines at the airports is TSA. It's not Delta. Delta's not letting them skip the lines. What Delta's letting them do is bypass the phone lines to be able to reroute their tickets when they're held overnight in Congress. I don't have a problem with that. The skipping the line, I have a real problem at all times, day or night, of Congress being able to skip the line. Congress should have to do what everybody else does. Now, I don't have to anymore flying out of Atlanta because I fly out of a private terminal out of Atlanta. Even though I get on Delta, I fly out of a different place for security reasons. But you're a member of Congress. You stand in line like everybody else. If I fly out of any other part of the country, I stand in line just like you and me. Now, I have pre-check, and I got clear, but I paid for that, and I do the line. Congress should have to do the line as well. Congress should not be able to, you know, Congress in the 1980s was very notorious, and in the 70s was notorious for exempting themselves from pretty much every law. I don't think Congress should be allowed to exempt themselves from all the laws. I just don't. I think that Congress needs to, when they implement a policy that the rest of us have to do, they should have to do it as well. They should have to experience it, feel it, do it, experience it, and suffer with the rest of us. Kudos to those members of Congress who have done that in the last week, have stood in line. Nancy Mace did not. Nancy Mace skipped the line that everybody else was in to go home. Debbie Wasserman Schultz skipped the line that everybody else had to be in to go home. John Thune skipped the line that everybody else is in to go home. Mike Collins didn't skip the line. Jared Moskowitz didn't skip the line. Mike Johnson skipped the line, but he's the Speaker of the House. He's not allowed to fly commercial because he's second in line to the presidency. They don't allow him to do it. But then Steve Scalise didn't skip the line. The House Republican Majority Leader in the House, he didn't skip the line. He was seen standing in line. Good for the Republicans for doing that. Nancy Mace skipped the line. Debbie Wasserman Schultz skipped the line. John Thune skipped the line. I appreciate the members of Congress, Democrat and Republican alike, who refused to skip the line and stood in the line with everyone else with the problems they caused. Now I wish they'd come back. By the way, I hope the President of the United States tonight summons Congress back to Washington next week. It is a very rarely used provision in Congress, in the Constitution, but the President of the United States can summon the House and the Senate back to Washington. And I hope that the president tonight doesn't just deal with the Iran situation. I hope the president surprises everyone and says, by the way, under Article 1 of the Constitution, I am summoning the Congress back to the United States, or maybe it's power under Article, but I think it's under Article 1, summoning the Congress back to the United States. I think he should do that. Back to the phones. Amir up next on the Birthright Citizenship case. Welcome, sir.
Hey, how you doing, sir? This is Amir.
Thanks for calling.
My question is about your the court case that's going on at the Supreme Court. Why is it that we can't do simple stuff like this? And I'm talking out of experience. Like I was telling your screener, my wife's sister and her husband 10 years ago applied to come to visit us as a tourists. And they had to prove on their end that they're coming back and they have a reason that they're just coming to visit, which they did. They stayed like a month and they left. But they got a visa for 10 years. Why do you give visas for 10 years? Number one, I get it. It's easier. They don't have to reapply and stuff like that. They're not high risk. But anyway, but the second is, if you want to prevent from people come here and give birth, why don't you make it where you give visas tops 3 months? And prior to issuance of visa, you have to go to the doctor and prove that you're not pregnant. And have paperwork ready.
I'm kind of really surprised we're letting this birthright citizenship thing go through.
Else.
Yeah, Amir, it boggles my mind that we're watching the Chinese Communist government, not exactly our friend, let people come here to the United States to give birth. They're not coming here. They're going to American territories, Guam and elsewhere overseas, doing it. It's insane to me that we're letting them do this. It's probably time for us to deal with this actual issue. But I am opposed to illegal aliens having birthright citizenship. I just think the law allows them to, and we need to change the law. My concern, based on the conversation of the Supreme Court today, is that the Supreme Court will recognize historic fixed exceptions. My hope is that the Supreme Court, and Amy Coney Barrett herself seemed amenable to this, is to recognize that Congress itself can add some new exceptions to the rule of birthright citizenship, that in that position it's not fixed. Here is the language. This is Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Section 5 says the Congress shall have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. I think the way that is worded, that it allows Congress to add some exceptions there too, and I think the Supreme Court should consider that language, and I hope that they will. And it sounds like from the oral argument they probably will. Hello there, welcome. It's Eric Erickson, 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, I would be delighted to have you with me. a word, if you will, for those of you who want the Supreme Court to change because the times have changed. That's called the living Constitution. When the Constitution changes to meet the moment as opposed to us amending the Constitution, that is the progressive position. Progressives have long maintained that the Constitution was a living document that changed with the times in its meaning. And today, the president's supporters are the progressives who want to support the living Constitution, changing the way the Constitution is now interpreted after 100 years of pretty consistent interpretation. The actual way that you change the Constitution is to amend it. As John Roberts pointed out today, when the Solicitor General of the United States argued the progressive position that these are new times, the Supreme Court Chief Justice responded, and it's the same Constitution. If you want it to be a different Constitution, you don't change it by reinterpreting it like the left does. You change it by amending it. That's the way the founders wanted it done. Have we forgotten the side we're on just because it's not working for us right now, perhaps? I'm a conservative. I don't believe in a living Constitution. It's a dead thing. I have the position of Justice Scalia. Justice Scalia, came up in that argument about it being the same Constitution, even though we're in new times, that if the Constitution is interpreted a consistent way for a very long time in this country, and it goes back to the writing of that amendment and the way it was interpreted in debate, and the way the debate claimed it was based on the prior laws, and the prior laws did something one way, and you want to change the Constitution. Stop embracing the idea of a living, breathing Constitution that changes with the times. That's what the progressive left has always done, and that is the entire project of the legal right and the Federalist Society over time has been to reject the idea of the living Constitution. You want the Constitution changed, you amend the Constitution. Takes 2/3 of both houses of Congress and 3/4 of the states, and it's possible to do it. We've done it like 27 times, so stop whining if you don't get your way and make the case to the public to amend the Constitution. In the meantime, let me tell you about Swiss America. They want to update you and bring you up to speed on what's happening with commodity markets and global trade with precious metals, and also their secret war on cash report, which you can get for free. All you do is go to SwissAmerica.com/Eric. SwissAmerica.com/Eric. Literally, as I'm doing this, CNBC has up about gold prices up right now. All the mining and silver and gold companies are up because of global markets. Swiss America can get you smarter than your friends when it comes to those sorts of prices. They can even help you with a precious metal IRA. I bought gold coins from them. You go to SwissAmerica.com/Eric, SwissAmerica.com/ERICK. When you go to SwissAmerica.com/Eric, very important, you'll see a form. That form allows you to fill it out and get the secret war on cash report completely for free. Completely for free. Just fill out the form at SwissAmerica.com/Eric, get the report, the secret war on cash, and then look up. You'll see a news and views tab. You click there, and you get your news and information about global economy, precious metals from Swiss America, the nation's trusted leader for 40 years in precious metals. SwissAmerica.com/Eric.